but now they're holding summits of their own. That demonstrates the multiplier effect of ASEAN on peace and stability in Asia as a whole. But it's not enough just to be an event organiser or a congenial puller of strings for meetings. ASEAN must play a more substantive role. It's up to us to develop an ASEAN worldview. We must have our own script. I quoted Marty at length, not to champion Indonesia especially, nothing wrong with that, but because he eloquently illustrates the rapid maturing of the region and raises its level of ambition and possibility. And what of Australia? Where does Australia fit in? Marty said in the same conversation with me, Australia is a huge asset for our discourse in regional architecture building discussions. It's part of an important intellectual debate in our region. I'm not one of those who ask the perennial question whether Australia is part of the region or not. You just do it, you're just there. You just get on and contribute. Now very much part and parcel of the scene, close quotes. And today's event illustrates that, I think. And that's great to hear, of course, especially for someone like me with the title of Asia Pacific editor. But Marty's is not a universally acknowledged perspective, even within Australia itself. That's inevitable given the extent to which we're a very diverse migrant society, more so than any other country in the whole region by some long way. Getting on for 1 in 3 Australian citizens was born somewhere else. Take my own family. I was born in England, my wife in New Zealand. Our son is a Hong Kong-born Chinese boy, and our daughter is the only one of the 4 actually born in Australia. She is blonde and speaks much better Chinese than our Chinese son. That gives us an international mindset, certainly. In some cases in Australia, of course, that mind is often on Lebanon or on Italy or on Chile or somewhere other than the Asia-Pacific region. But a growing proportion of the million Australians who are working overseas at any one time are doing so in the region. Young lawyers or accountants used to rush to London for their overseas experience. Now it's more likely to be Bangkok or Shanghai. The rates fluctuate from month to month, but towards the end of last year, the numbers of people from China migrating to Australia began for the first time to exceed those from Britain or New Zealand. Asia is actually, of course, a Western concept, the word originally coming from a Greek description of Anatolia, the Asian part of modern Turkey. People who live in Asia don't really identify themselves as such, of course, except over and against folk from other parts of the world. They view themselves primarily as Japanese, as Thai, as Mongolian, as Chinese, as Vietnamese. In Britain, they understand Asians principally to mean people from Pakistan and India. Probably here in Australia, it might be recognised most commonly as referring to people from Southeast and East Asia. 20 years ago, a lively debate emerged in Australia about whether we were an Asian country or not. On the whole, Conservatives followed the lead of John Howard in arguing that we shouldn't have to choose between our history and our geography, that we both were and weren't, while those more on the left tended to stress Australia's Asianness. Much of the edginess of the debate hung up on the concept, which was then very current, of Asian values and an Asian way, as preemptively defined for the rest of the region by Lee Kuan Yew and his sometime regional adversary, Mohammad Mahathir. They claimed that this Asian way comprised a version of authoritarian capitalism infused with a rather partial version of Confucianism. This project has since slowly deflated like an air cushion with the stopper out, although a few latter-day advocates still flail around with it. Within Australia, the Pauline Hanson phenomenon followed, in which she has been left stranded as a failed celebrity dancer. The Asianists effectively won. No one tries to correct me when I write about the Asia Pacific as our region. When Australia's soccer team shifted into the Asian League, I can't recall anyone here saying, but we're not Asian. A couple of years ago, I travelled to New Delhi for a dialogue between Indian think tanks and AsiaLink, based at Melbourne University. Our team included several Southeast Asians with strong Australian connections. This surprised and pleased our Indian hosts, who had not yet themselves developed as strong Asian networks, despite India's not always convincing look east strategy. The perceptions that shaped our country a century ago at its birth were caught up in the widespread racial anxiety in Western nations about the spilling over of a collapsing China. Right through to the downfall of the Soviet Union, we were subject to a residual security-driven fear of an Asian form of communism thrusting south. That's changed. Compared with many countries, and because we're so open economically, yet have such massive savings, we've got the fourth largest amount of funds under management in the world, thanks to our mandatory pension scheme. We've become reasonably financially literate. We're all anxiously watching to see what happens to our mounting pensions. This has proved a crucial element in our increasingly positive perception of our neighbourhood. China is perceived in much of the West as a threat. In Australia, it is mostly perceived as opportunity. It is by far our biggest trading partner, $105 billion last year two-way. At the same time, controversies keep surging about foreign investment in general, but I don't think Australia is unique in that. At the moment, there are protests about farmland being sold for mining or for coal seam methane gas exploitation. The government recently rejected a bid by the Singapore Stock Exchange to take over effectively the Australian exchange. The leader of the Greens party here, Senator Bob Brown, said Singaporeans, quotes, don't respect this nation in the way they should. They have a poor track record in regarding Australians as equals. But these things are said mostly now from the margins. Our elite arts are increasingly strongly enmeshed with Asia. Through the patronage of organisations like AsiaLink and the Arts Council, etc., through personal networks and experience, and indeed aesthetic taste, our fine artists, painters, musicians, writers, have provided us with cross-cultural experiences, often more successful even than fusion cuisine has been. One of the biggest Australian films of the last few years has been Bruce Beresford's moving story, Mao's Last Dancer, about the early life of Australia's highest paid inspirational speaker, the former dancer and now stockbroker who migrated from China, Li Cunxin. Our educational institutions aren't always keeping up, I have to say. Our schools don't include enough about Asia in their curricula, and universities' expertise on Asia also is in danger of shrinking. Critically, Asian language skills are languishing. In 2009, just 240 students from a non-Chinese background studied Chinese in Year 12 in the whole country. And while our trade is now overwhelmingly dominated by Asia, our business community has very few chief executives or main board members with direct experience of living and working in Asia, with a few exceptions like ANZ Bank. The same might be said for the top people at most of our universities. Partly as a result, we invest very little in Asia, less than 20% of our total foreign investments. We've invested about the same amount in China, for instance, as we have in Luxembourg, a country of 550,000. That's all a pity because we need more Asia literacy. As we become ever more deeply enmeshed